Hey everyone, before we start the show, I just want to get some plugs out of the way. If you enjoy this podcast and you're into wrestling, check out the Nerds and Marks podcast or Marty and Sarah Love Wrestling. If you're not getting your fill on movie and entertainment discussion, then check out the Entertainment Buffet podcast. If you want to dive into the world of video games, I highly recommend the Darkcast by my friends over at darkstation.com. Listen to them cover important topics and interview men and women from all over the industry. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Hello everyone and welcome to Shelved. I am your host, Jeremy Meyer. Now, there was no mini episode this Monday because this week we are not doing a script episode. We are actually going to be doing something a little different. Now, I launched the podcast on January 16th. It was something I had been planning for years, actually. I knew I've always wanted to do a podcast. And I was just never sure of what I wanted to cover, what I wanted to talk about. I had a couple different ideas that ended up being scrapped, and I'm going to talk about those a little later in this episode. But basically, it's now June, and we're past June 16th. I should have planned something around then, but we're basically halfway through the year and almost 6 months into my podcast. I guess technically this would be 5 months since I started middle of January, but basically, I'm going to use June as a half-year kind of review roundup of the show and kind of talk about some things and just gush over you guys and the show and everything that I've been going through over the last year. Now, things are starting to get a little busier in my life with my day job. We do... As anyone who's listening to the show might know, I work at 1 Hour Tees and Pro Wrestling Tees, and I'm a Pro Wrestling Tees printer. That's my day job. And we do big shirt sales twice a year. We do one for 4th of July and one for Christmas. And these sales basically have us working from 10 a.m. to midnight. Sometimes one night I've been there till 3 in the morning for like 2 months, basically. Just trying to, because we last holiday sale we sold 11,000 shirts, and so we stay all night and print those for like 2 months straight, and it's super hectic and super crazy, and it doesn't leave me with a lot of time, and then that leaves me not really wanting to do anything on my weekends. So because of that, I will not be able to do as many script-based episodes in the coming months starting in July. So I wanted to do some alternative episodes, some things I've been kicking around for a while anyway that I really wanted to try, and now's as good a time as ever because my time is about to be running out. And obviously I'm going to still have some script episodes during that time. I'm actually preparing some of those now, trying to get them recorded before this big sale starts and I run out of time. But I can give you a hint. The next one will probably be Spider-Man, and that'll come out on the day that Spider-Man comes out in July 7th, I believe that is, for Spider-Man Homecoming, which I'm a huge Spider-Man fan, and I know we've already covered a Spider-Man script. We covered one pretty early on in the show, but this is actually, if you listen to that story, this is the one that took place before that script that we read. It was when Canon Films owned the rights to Spider-Man, and they wrote a script. I think it's dated like 1985 or 1983 even. And yeah, it was the script that was going to be used before James Cameron stepped in to do Spider-Man. So I'm really interested to see what a 80s Spider-Man movie could have been. But yeah, we'll have that. And then some more episodes that I'm excited for throughout the year we'll talk about. But all right, let's get in the beginning here. So yeah, like I said, almost 6 months through the show, and I've had over 4,500 downloads, and that's awesome. Like, I know it probably seems low. Like most podcasts people listen to, they get that on one episode. But for me, I never thought anybody would listen. I'm very grateful to even have one download on any episode. And I know my mini episodes always get fewer downloads, but that's to be expected. The mini episodes, they're not really necessary. I've often kicked around the idea of not doing them, but I like having an outlet where, like, hey, I watched a movie, so I want to talk about that movie and review it. And, kind of like what a regular movie podcast might do, or just like, hey, I have this topic I want to talk about, or like a top 10 list. And I like having those mini episodes to be that medium. So I don't think they're going to go away anytime soon, or maybe in the future if they do. I don't know how many people actually go and read the scripts. I like telling people, like, hey, here's the script we're going to be covering. But I could always do that at the end of the Friday episodes. So I don't know if that, like, maybe the mini episodes will become bonus episodes and will only happen once in a while. But that remains to be seen. For now, I'm going to keep doing them because I like having those episodes. I like having extra things to talk about. And I love podcasting. So having more episodes to do, having them go up twice a week, it's a little stressful. It's a little bit of work, but I like that my podcast is work. Like, if it was easy, then anybody else would have done it. And yeah, my podcast requires a lot of work from me. Like, me and my guest have to read a script and, dissect it, take notes, but I have a lot of fun doing that. And so far, I think everybody else has had fun too. And people really like hearing the responses to the episodes and hearing the comments and things, which you guys, I've made some great friends on Twitter because of the show. And I've managed to have some of those people on as guests, and some of those people I just interact with on a regular basis on Twitter. And it's been so great. Like, that's why I like doing this thing. I just want to thank everybody who's listened, everybody who's left a review. I've currently, if you search for Shelved Podcast on iTunes, it's just got a 5-star rating, which is great. Because, there's only 12 reviews. I would really appreciate more reviews. Because that's another thing that helps push the show in front of people. And that's one thing I'm always thinking about is, how can I spread the show around with, I don't have a lot of money to do advertising. And I've advertised a couple times on Marty and Sarah Love Wrestling, and that's been very successful for me. And I have been so happy with the responses from that. And I know basically 90% of my listeners come from Marty and Sarah. So I thank them. I thank you for following the show and all of the nice comments that I've gotten. I don't think I've gotten one shitty comment since doing the show, and that's been awesome. So I really appreciate that. I've people on YouTube as well, because the podcast, I don't know if everybody knows, the podcast uploads to iTunes, Stitcher. We are finally on Stitcher. YouTube, a blogger site. It uploads to our Tumblr, like pretty much everywhere that my hosting service will let me upload it to, I do. And I've honestly gotten a lot of attention on YouTube lately for it. Somebody recently was requesting a Jurassic Park script, and then literally like a day or two later, somebody emailed me a Jurassic Park script. So and I'm pretty sure it's not the same person. Their screen names didn't seem to match, and I asked the emailer person, they never responded if it was them, but I'm pretty sure it's different people. So that was like a weird coincidence, and that is the Jurassic Park script that people might have heard of, where there were human dinosaur hybrids. So I'm pretty fucking excited to read that. That one will probably come around next year when the next movie is going to come out. I would love to do that one sooner, but I think that it's smart to hold off until then. But yeah, I'm super grateful, and just thank you everybody who's been listening. So I do have a couple things I do want to do on this show. I do want to do another top 10 list. It's been a little while since I've done a top 10. I do have a movie review that I want to talk about. And I thought I had something else. I guess I want to talk about the future episodes of the show during this time where I'm going to be super busy. I want to talk about what I'm going to be doing to fill that time. So first, why don't I jump into my movie review? So last year I didn't see a lot of movies. I've been doing a lot to catch up from last year. There's a lot of stuff I wanted to see last year, just didn't get around to it. This year's been totally different. I've seen a lot of movies this year so far. And one of them that I missed towards the beginning of the year that I finally saw, because it came out on Blu-ray, was John Wick 2. Now, I love the first John Wick. It is one of my favorite movies from the last few years. It's just such a simple story. It's some amazing action scenes, and Keanu Reeves, I love Keanu Reeves. I don't care. I know he's got this stigma of being one people make fun of, but The Matrix is one of my favorite movies of all time, and he's done a lot of great stuff. He has a huge filmography, and John Wick was just a fucking home run hit for him. And the second one, I really wanted to see it when it came out. I heard a lot of different things. I heard some people say it, wasn't as good as the first, but still great. I've heard some people say it was as good as the first, or some people say it was better than the first. So it was all good things, but like a variety of good opinions. So I finally saw it, and I will say it's not as good as the first. It's not better than the first. It's just slightly under. The story, it's a little more complicated, so it's not as simple of a movie. It's not like complicated. It's just there's more going on. There's more to it than the simple revenge story that we've had before. But it's still some of the best action scenes you'll ever see. It feels like there wasn't as much action in this one, and some of the action scenes it was a little more stylized, so you don't get as many clear views of all the headshots. Like there's a scene where they have like a gunfight in a tunnel, and it's a lot of people. You're like watching him shoot down flashlights, basically. So you're not seeing a lot of what's going on, but it's still a great scene. And but I feel like what they lack in number of action scenes, they make up for with like cinematography and stuff, because the movie looks really nice. It's really colorful, a lot of like neon and just bright colors. Just some better camera styles and stuff. They really step it up in the direction part to make up for, hey, there might not be as much action in this one, although there's still plenty of action. And it's still just great. And I love some of the characters, like Ruby Rose as a deaf assassin is a really cool idea. And I love that. And I just love that everybody just seems to be able to speak every language. Like they really build on this world of assassins that is only kind of hinted at in the first one in some interesting ways. Like they introduce a high council. That's a hard word for me. A high council. And they do a lot of interesting stuff with the world of the movie and that was one good thing about the first one, and it's something I compare to Mad Max Fury Road is a lot of things are implied as far as right out told to you, and this one just adds a lot more to that. My biggest gripe of the movie is it does end on a cliffhanger, but we already know we're getting a John Wick 3, and they have apparently there's a John Wick comic book series coming out that I'd never heard about, but I'll gladly read that. And they're talking about doing a TV series as well, like a prequel, like, oh, here's the stories. I doubt it would feature Keanu Reeves. It would obviously be somebody else, but it would be amazing if Keanu decided to do it. The guy's already worth so much fucking money that he could afford to slum it for a while. And TV's fucking great, so he should do it. But yeah, so John Wick 2 is kind of the only new movie I've seen recently. I feel like there's going to be a lot more movie reviews coming because we hooked up a Blu-ray player at work, so now we can bring in Blu-rays and watch a bunch of shit. So we've been watching a ton of stuff. Just a little heads up, if you know about a website called Letterboxd, it's kind of a website that you want to connect with your friends, and you basically, like, anytime you watch something, you log it on Letterboxd, and you can write a review if you want, or you could just be like, I watched this. You can give it a rating, like out of 5 stars, which is my preferred method. So you can actually go on Letterboxd and follow me. I don't use it a ton. Like, that's been one of my goals for this year is I want to use it a lot. I actually downloaded, they have a phone app that you can use, and it's Letterboxd spelled letter, how you would spell letter. Boxed is spelled without the E, so it's BOXD. And it's a really fun website if you're a movie buff, and like if you have a lot of friends and you guys like talking about movies, it's a good way to just keep track of what you guys have been watching. It's a good conversation piece. Like, I can look here and it's like, oh, June 2017, what did I log? I saw John Wick Chapter 2, Megan Levy, Wonder Woman, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales, and Alien Resurrection. That's because we watched the entire Alien series at work. If I go to May, I have Aliens, Alien 3, Alien, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Prometheus. So, big Alien marathon at the end of May. But yeah, Letterboxd is really fun, and I'm trying to use it a lot more. I try to write a review if I have any, like, not super long. Like, I do have a movie blog where I used to write reviews, and I would write really long reviews because that's one of my favorite things to write. But on Letterboxd, I try to give you the gist of how I feel about the movie, and it's a lot of fun to use. So you can find me on Letterboxd. I think you can just search for my name, Jeremy Meyer. It's my Twitter is also on there, so maybe at Advent_Crash. I don't know exactly how you can find me, but it's got the same profile picture that my main Twitter uses, which is a picture of a dog. So you can just try to find me on there and follow me if you want to see what I'm watching and kind of see my thoughts on it. But it's a fun thing to use, and I want to start using it more. So I'd like to have more people follow me, and if you follow me on there, I will follow you back. Just because I'm only following like 3 or 4 people on Letterboxd. I need more people to follow, just so I have more of a reason to keep checking it every day. But yeah, so there's my review of John Wick 2. So why don't we go into my top 10 list? Which this is a top 10 list. It was one of the first ones I thought of when I came up with the idea of doing the top 10 list, because one of my favorite things about movies is how everyone feels differently about a movie. And I like a lot of movies that people tell me are really bad. Like, I like the Chronicles of Riddick movie, and we'll talk about that a little later, because basically this list is top 10 underrated movies. Now, these are movies that I really like, or like to a certain degree. Like, I'm not going to say these are all like 5-star movies or that I love them, but they're movies that I feel like I need to defend for some reason, because I'm like, hey, it's really not as bad as everybody says it is. So I'm going to go ahead and throw out an honorable mention for number 11 to Avatar. I know Avatar is the biggest movie of all time. It doesn't really need defending, but commercially it did well. Critically, that movie gets shit on, and it's been since 2007. The movie catches a lot of shit, and you know what? I'm not gonna say it deserves it, but look, the story, it's a little bland. It's been done before. We've seen it all before with this movie. But I still think Avatar is a great fucking movie. Like, you'll never see anything that looks like it. It's still got some great action scenes. Yeah, it's a little preachy. It's definitely like Fern Gully meets Dances with Wolves. But, Speed is Die Hard on a bus. So it's not like it's the first movie to kind of take what something else did and do it better. Not to say Speed is better than Die Hard, but you know what I mean. So just some honorable mention to Avatar. I understand the complaints about that movie, but I still really fucking enjoy it. All right, so why don't we start from the number 10? And the number 10 I got is Punisher Warzone. Now, I am a huge comic book fan, as everybody knows. I've been actually diving pretty deep back into comics here lately. But I'm a huge Punisher fan, and I really enjoyed that first Punisher movie when it came out. I enjoy it less now. And when Punisher Warzone came out in 2008, this is after Dark Knight, this is after Iron Man, this is after Incredible Hulk. So people wanted a sequel to that Thomas Jane movie. And when it first came out, I watched it, and I was like, oh, I don't know about this movie. But then, this was before I was like a big Punisher fan, but then I went back and I read, I'm probably going to say his name wrong, but I think it's Gareth Ennis's 2004 run of The Punisher, which is now one of my favorite comic series of all time. It's really gritty and gross and graphic and violent, and it's awesome. And Punisher Warzone pulls most of its material from that book. Like, a lot of the crazy, big, gross-out moments from Punisher Warzone are literally ripped from pages of the comic. Like, when he throws the guy on the fence and jumps down and breaks his neck, that's 100% a scene from, like, one of the first issues of the comic. I think when the guy is sitting in the chair and he just blows his face off with a shotgun, again, I think it's right out of the comic. Punisher Warzone is more faithful to the Punisher comics, in particular that run, than the first movie was. Like, a Punisher for a long time, he was a 60s character, I believe, and it was just a little... I'm not a big fan of the old Punisher stuff. A little, not, I want to say campy, but just 60s comics are just not really my thing. And the 2004 Punisher run is the definitive run of Punisher, in my opinion. There actually is some great stuff afterwards. There was a run in, I think, 2011 that was really good. It was only 3 volumes, and I highly recommend them. And then there was a short run in 2014 with that Marvel relaunch that they did that is also really good. But that one, because they did their big crossover event, and they kind of ruined that series by ending it too soon. And then the current Punisher comics, I'm not feeling it. The art is it just really brings it down for me. But yeah, Punisher Warzone, way better than people give it credit for. If you haven't seen it in a long time, I highly recommend going back to check it out. It's very underrated. And I would say read the comic before. Like, get a little... You can find that run on Comixology if you wanted to go digital, but they have recently been putting out Punisher. It's usually called Punisher Max. Punisher Max, the complete collection, has recently been coming out, so I would recommend checking that out. So my number 9 underrated movie is Speed Racer. I don't hear anybody talk about this movie, and when it came out, it definitely has its defenders, but I don't think it's a movie that gets enough credit. You will never see a movie that looks like this. It is 100% bringing a live action cartoon to life. And it's a fun movie. It's incredible. It's got a great message. It's the most colorful thing you'll ever see. Like, it's 100% a great Blu-ray demo disc. Like, hey, I want to show off my shit, so I'm going to throw in Speed Racer. And it's a great movie for that, but I also think it's just a really fun movie. The race scenes are awesome. The look of the movie is so unique, and some of the ideas they come up with are really original. Like when they crash the cars and it fills up with like this foam bubble to protect the driver and stuff. Like, there's a lot of really cool stuff in the movie, and just the way the cars function and the way they can spin and turn and stuff. And you get the classic Speed Racer moments, like him using the gadgets on the car. For the most part, he drives the Mach 6, but there's a race in the middle where he uses the Mach 5. It's like an off-the-books underground street race type thing. But they're going through mountains and deserts and stuff, and he's using the jump jets, and it's just amazing. Like, I don't think people gave that movie a fair shot, and if you've never watched it, I highly recommend checking it out. Like, don't buy into the bad discussion on that movie. It's worth watching. You really have to have the right mindset going in, I will say that. But it's a live action cartoon, and it's amazing, and it's probably the best we'll ever see. And it's like a live action cartoon if you did it exactly like the cartoon, which is a really interesting way to do it. And just the Wachowskis, they've put out a lot of shit, I'll be honest. And on top of but the first Matrix and Speed Racer aside, I think it's the best movies they'll ever do. And I'm someone who likes the Matrix sequels. I will definitely say I like the Matrix sequels over Speed Racer. But Speed Racer, you need to check out. It is highly underrated. Okay, so our next one is a tie, because these are two movies that I feel they came out in the same year, I believe, and they are perfect examples of... Well, I guess I should just say the movies first. So number 8 is Live Free or Die Hard, which is the 4th Die Hard movie, and Terminator Salvation, which is the 4th Terminator movie. Now, the similarities between these are two older franchises that hadn't had a movie in quite a long time. And, Terminator less so, because I think Terminator 3 was 2003, but the last Die Hard movie was like 90-something, 98 maybe? So there were two older franchises coming back. They were R-rated franchises, and these movies were PG-13, although I think they both had an unrated cut. And they're both movies that people kind of shit on and are like, oh, why do we need another sequel, blah, blah, blah. And for one, I hate that. Like, if a franchise is great, make as many as you want. Just make them good. Like, yeah, it really sucks when you make a bad one, but hey, I'll take as many. If I want to fucking hang out with John McClane, like, I don't want to have to watch the same movies all the time. Like, give me more. But, like, hey, that 5th Die Hard movie was fucking terrible, but I would still watch a 6th one, you know? But Live Free or Die Hard, I think it's great. Like, it's honestly almost one of my favorite in the franchises. Like, yes, it gets a little ridiculous at the end. He takes down a plane. I get it. But everything before that and even everything after that, that's like the one scene in that movie where they go a little too far. It's fucking great. I love the story. I love the idea of it. I love him having the sidekick with Justin Long. Some of the action scenes are some of my favorite in the franchise. Like, I love the fight scene with Maggie Q, and it ends in the elevator in the car hanging out. That's a really tense, fucking great action scene. I love McClane's kind of like he can handle himself. He knows he can handle himself. This is the 4th time he's had to deal with something like this. But just his annoyance with it of like, oh God, I'm really doing this again. It's really good, and I really don't understand how people hate this movie so much. Like, yeah, they dipped pretty heavy into CG and started to do some kind of outlandish action scenes. But a lot of the stuff they also did for real, like when they jumped the helicopter into the car into the helicopter, that they really did that. You know, they had to set up a ramp and everything, and it's unrealistic, but it's fucking cool, and they actually did it. And yeah, they threw a guy down some steps and just put like a metal pole on his back. They're still doing stunts like that. It's a really good Die Hard movie, and I think it's really underrated, and I think people need to give it another chance. I will say, watch the unrated cut. It is a little better, mostly just because you can hear him say fuck like one more time. But yeah, I don't think they should have made it PG-13, but it's still a really good movie. And Terminator Salvation, kind of the same thing. You know what? We've seen a Terminator go back in time 3 times now, and the first 2 times it was amazing, and Terminator 3 has some good moments. I'll say Terminator 3 is a bad movie that I kind of enjoy. Like the fucking crane plowing through the building with Arnold hanging off of it, it's really great. The ending action scene I actually really love. The whole fight in the 3rd act is a lot of fun, and it's crazy to see Skynet come online and just start killing people. But Terminator Salvation, it's like, hey, they finally gave us something different. It's a movie that takes place in the future. You got Christian Bale as John Connor, and Christian Bale's a great actor, so I was fine with it. People complain about Sam Worthington, as I think his name is Marcus. I haven't seen the movie in a while, as the Terminator human guy, but I love that stuff, and I think he's fine in the movie. He's not an amazing actor. He's one of those actors I think that has a lot of potential and just never realized it. He was lucky to be in Avatar, I will say that, but Avatar is actually what got him the job for Terminator, and I think Terminator was really good. The future is one of the more interesting aspects of the Terminator franchise, and we've only seen a little bit of it in the first 3 movies, and now, like, hey, here it is, but like, they don't have lasers yet, but it's still the beginning, and it's like John Connor's not the leader of the Resistance yet, and even by the end of the movie, he's only just becoming the leader because all the other leaders are killed. You know, he hasn't inspired everybody yet, just the people around him. And it's a really great movie, and they were planning on doing a trilogy in the future, and I'm so bummed that we didn't get that, and instead we got Terminator Genesis, which was just terrible. But the idea that, like, oh, they were going to bring back Robert Patrick and they were going to make the T-1000 in the next movie, like, I'm so bummed we didn't get it. It honestly would have been a better trajectory for the franchise. But all right, those are my number 8s. My number 7 is a movie I saw recently, and is Assassin's Creed. Nobody fucking talked about this movie when it came out. I understand the stigma that comes with video game movies, but Assassin's Creed is one of my favorite video game franchises. I'm really excited for the new one that was just announced, Assassin's Creed Origins. But Assassin's Creed is maybe the best made video game movie. It's not my favorite. Mortal Kombat will always be my favorite, but Assassin's Creed is my number 2 at this point. Like, my top 3 used to be Mortal Kombat, Silent Hill, and I would usually go Prince of Persia because, well, again, while it's not an amazing movie, it's a really fun movie, and it is one of the better made video game movies. But now it would be Mortal Kombat, Assassin's Creed, and Silent Hill, which I think are three of the best video game movies ever made. And Assassin's Creed is one that shows, like, it was successful enough. It didn't do as much money as it should have at the box office. But Assassin's Creed shows that, like, hey, you can do these movies really well. It's got some really good artistic choices that also harken back to the games. So Assassin's Creed, it's got some great action scenes. And Michael Fassbender's a goddamn national treasure. So it's well deserving of your attention. If you totally skipped it, if you're a fan of the series, you absolutely should watch this movie, because while it has some kind of cheesy parts or just some like kind of weird story moments, it's still overall a really great Assassin's Creed movie. It's maybe the most Assassin's Creed movie they could ever make. But yeah, so Assassin's Creed, highly check it out. Number 6, Chronicles of Riddick, which I mentioned before. Now, Riddick, I will say everybody's, for the most part, seems to love Pitch Black. It was pretty early on in Vin Diesel's career. It was a movie that kind of came out of nowhere. It's really unique, really interesting, and it's a really fucking great kind of like indie sci-fi horror movie. And the character of Riddick is one that I love. Like, I love the idea of this convict anti-hero and his eyes and the whole thing about the character, how he can see in the dark. If you haven't seen Pitch Black, I highly recommend Pitch Black. It's legitimately a great movie. Now, Chronicles of Riddick was the first sequel, and it's not as good a movie, but like I said, I really love the character of Riddick, so I really want more with him. Like, I would watch a 20 movie franchise with Riddick, especially now with Vin Diesel, like, as big as the Fast and Furious has got. Like, I think they could make a series like this a little more bankable. They did put out the third one, which was better. But Vin Diesel's definitely fallen into a place where, like, in the first two movies, he at least tried a little bit of acting, but he now he's like, and I noticed this in Fate of the Furious as well, he's kind of just become a one-liner machine, and that's kind of a bummer. But Chronicles of Riddick, I will say, half of the movie is the best part of the franchise, and I think the whole movie should have been based around this. So there's a chunk in the middle of the movie. So the big problem with the movie is they introduced this villain that's just way too big for the scope of this movie. Like, they wanted to make a bigger movie, and I understand that, but the villain they introduced is just, it's bad, like, completely. So they introduced this army called the Necromongers, and it's led by this, like, ghost, half human, half ghost guy called the Lord Marshal, and it's what kind of kills the movie, because that stuff is all really stupid. But the opening of the movie that shows Riddick, like, hiding out on a planet and being chased by mercs is great. There's a chunk in the middle of the movie where he gets captured by mercenaries and then sent to a prison called Crematoria. And this part is fantastic. He's on this planet where in the sunlight, it's like 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and basically everybody just burns up instantly. And then on the other side of the planet, it's so cold that you would just freeze to death. And basically, him and the rest of the prisoners, they, kind of bust themselves out, and they're like, well, we have to get to the hangar before the guards do. But they kind of shut the doors and we can't go, so we have to run on the surface in between the spot where it's daylight and nighttime, like as the sun is rising, so they don't burn up, where it's kind of like the perfect temperature. And it's amazing. Like, that whole section of the movie is incredible, and they really should have based the entire movie around this prison planet, because it's such a cool idea. And just the mercenary stuff and with Riddick is kind of the highlights of the movie. And that's why the third movie was better too, because that was a big part of it. Whereas the third movie, they were also just redoing the first one. But yeah, that part of the movie is amazing. And it takes up enough of the runtime that I can still enjoy it. And they have to introduce, like, oh, why are his eyes like this? Like, what is he? And they introduce, like, a new race called the Furian, which is, that stuff kind of is what it is. And they're doing a fourth one where they're going to do more of that as well. But, like, for now, what we have for Riddick, the second one is the weakest, but that chunk in the middle of the movie is, I think, the best part of the franchise. And, I think it's worth checking out just for that. So my next movie is Jurassic Park 3. I don't think there is a bad Jurassic Park movie. Like, Jurassic Park 3 is definitely the weakest, and people really shit on it when it came out. I didn't see it for a while, but Jurassic Park 3 is still a pretty good fucking Jurassic Park movie. There's some annoying actors in it. There's like Taya Leone. I don't think it's super great. The plot itself is, it is what it is. It's an excuse to go back to the island. But when they're on the island, there's a lot of great things that happen. I actually really like the scene in the pterodactyl pin. That is super tense, super exciting. It's something we haven't seen in the movies yet. And it's interesting. The big new dinosaur, the Spinosaurus, I think they call it. And the whole him having the phone inside of him, it's a funny gag. And honestly, bringing back Sam Neill is a big part of why I like the movie as well. Jurassic Park 3, it's not amazing, but it is underrated. Like, it's not as bad as everybody claims it is. There's still plenty of great dinosaur scenes. The raptors, they kind of changed the look of them because there was like new evidence of what raptors actually would have looked like in real life, and they tried to incorporate some of that. But raptors were always kind of invented for the movies anyway. Like, hey, sorry folks, velociraptors didn't actually exist. So, like, who cares at this point? It's like, hey, we got this dinosaur. They're very popular. Let's just do it. But yeah, I mean, Jurassic World is a better movie, but Jurassic Park 3, I think there's still a lot there. It's still like it's worth owning the whole set and marathoning them all. It's worth your time. So number 4, and this one's a little more relevant to some movies that have come out recently. Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man's Chest. Now, I love the first 3 Pirates of the Caribbean movies. 4 and 5 I think are okay. But the first 3 I think are a solid trilogy, and everyone shits on 2 and 3, but Dead Man's Chest is maybe my secret favorite of the franchise. The first one is by far the best movie. It's the superior movie, the best made. The story's tighter, and they're all fun. The third one maybe less so because it's a little convoluted, I hated the first one, the third one. I mean, when I saw it for the first time, but on repeat viewings, when I kind of understood the plot, I loved it. But Dead Man's Chest, I think, has some of my favorite moments of the franchise. I love the 3-way sword fight on the island. Like, I think that's a really great scene, and it's just so much fun. Like, I don't understand why the second one gets as much hate as it does. Plus, it introduces Davy Jones, who is my favorite villain in a long time in movies. So the second one, it's the weird part on the island with the cannibals is maybe the only down part of the movie for me. But I love what it adds to the series, and I love Beckett introducing him as the villain. Although I think most of the best parts with him come in the third one. But 2 is where they introduce all these characters, and Davy Jones definitely shines more in the second one than the third one. But it's just so good, and it's definitely got some dumb moments, but they all do. And the first one is just less than the others. But 2 is a solid step up, and I actually think Depp's performance as Jack Sparrow is more honed in the second one, which, I mean, obviously it would be. He figured it out in the first one, and he perfected it in the second one. You can even say the same thing with Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark in the sequels. Like, Iron Man 2 may not be as good of a movie, but Robert Downey Jr. has nailed it a lot more than in the first one. So my next 2 are actually the third entries in a franchise. So my number 3, and this one's probably going to get me the most hate, is Spider-Man 3. Now, that movie has a lot of shit in it, and I will only defend it to a point, but I will say, for as much bad shit they have in that movie, they still have all of that great stuff you loved from the other Spider-Man movies. Like, the fights with the Sandman are still great, even though the Sandman character sucks. The fight with Venom is still awesome, even though they totally squandered Venom. And just the action scene in the beginning with him and Harry, I really like. Like, there's definitely some bogged down, like the dancing stuff. And I've actually heard a defense on this, that Peter Parker is like a nerd, and he has no impression of cool. And when he's going to act cool, that would be his impression of cool, because he just doesn't know. And I'll accept that. Like, that's fine. But yeah, I mean, Spider-Man 3, I still enjoy a lot of it. Like, I love the fights. I love showing him fighting outside of his costume with Harry. I do love the big ending battle, and it does have some great humor in it with Jameson, and, you know, it was, like, you look at that as a trilogy, and obviously it's weaker, and there's always the story. Even Sam Raimi has come out and said that he totally fucked it up, but I disagree. There's still a lot of great stuff in that movie. It's the weakest one. It's the weakest Spider-Man movie ever made, I would say, but it's not terrible. There's still some good stuff in it. Fun fact, I actually have done my own fan edit of the movie where I cut out 30 minutes by removing Sandman's backstory and kind of just turning him into a villain who, if you watch my version, he's just kind of out for money, and he ends up teaming up with Venom out of necessity. But I really like the movie. It definitely has its issues, but I still get a lot of enjoyment out of watching Spider-Man 3. So my number 2 is Alien 3, which I've watched recently. This Alien movie, like everybody always says, oh, there's the first 2, and then you just kind of ignore the rest. But I completely disagree. Alien Resurrection is a shit movie. That movie falls under my theory that bad movies kind of have a limited number of watches, and then you just can't take it anymore. I've hit my limit with movies like Batman and Robin and James Bond Die Another Day, but Alien Resurrection is another one that we did a marathon of all these movies at work, and I just can't defend that movie. Alien 3, however, I think is great. It's different. It's a little more unique to the franchise. It's definitely dark and bleak, and that can kind of bring you down. But it's different. It's interesting. It adds some stuff to the alien mythology of, hey, when these aliens attach to different things, they kind of incorporate elements of those creatures into their, new design when they're birthed or whatever you want to say. And the dog alien in Alien 3 is awesome. I actually recently watched the documentary on this movie on the Blu-ray, and they openly show David Fincher talking shit about Fox executives behind the scenes. Because if you don't know, that movie went through a hell of a fucking behind the scenes fiasco. Just nobody wanted to trust Fincher. And when you watch the Blu-ray, there's a lot of, man, if only we knew that this guy was going to become one of the greatest directors. Because it was his first movie. He was coming off of music videos. And yeah, it's a lot of kicking themselves in the ass. And just they started filming the movie without a script because they went through so many different iterations of a script. And I highly recommend the making of stuff on the Blu-ray. It's fascinating, but it really shows how they managed to make this movie, which I think is very good, after the shit show it was of the production. And unfortunately, David Fincher doesn't partake in any of that stuff because he kind of wanted his name off the movie. He's written it off, and I think that's really unfortunate because, he did the best he could, and I think he still made a good movie. There's a lot of good shit in that movie, and I don't understand the hate this movie gets. Like, obviously, it's okay. I will say, the killing of Newton Hicks, I get it. It's really sucks. It's really terrible. But you know what? It's the choice they made, and I think Alien 3 is a perfectly fine movie. And honestly, if they stopped there, like, I would have been a little disappointed because, like, to me, I love Prometheus. First of all, Prometheus is one of my favorite movies. But it's not as bad as everybody says. I just don't get it. Alien 3 is totally fine. Yeah, it's just a little more dark. And my number 1 underrated movie, which is a movie I don't think a lot of people are like super down on, but I just think it deserves more credit than it receives because every time I watch it, I like it more and more. And secretly, I think it's becoming one of my favorite in the franchise. But it is 007 in Quantum of Solace. This was the second Daniel Craig movie, and it's coming off of Casino Royale, which is my number 2 movie of all time, the best James Bond movie ever made. And it's like a perfect movie. So coming off of Casino Royale, there's going to be a lot to live up to. Now, I first saw these movies back to back. I watched the one day, one the next day, because I saw them way later after Quantum had already come out. And I was like, I'd always seen this movie, Casino Royale, and I didn't know what it was. But then when I found out it was a James Bond movie, I was like, oh, shit, like, I should watch this. So I ended up watching them both, and I was like, yeah, this Quantum was not as good, but it's still a really fucking great movie. Like, why did people shit on this? And I've heard other people share this opinion, but my theory is you need to watch those movies back to back. First of all, Quantum takes place like 15 minutes after Casino Royale. So the whole, like, hey, this is right after, it adds a lot to the movie because it feels like a continuation of that movie. And I will say the first time I saw it, I was definitely like, yeah, it wasn't as good. It's way more of an action movie than a spy movie. But the more I watch it, the better it becomes. Because for one, this movie is beautiful. Like, it was shot so well. It's the most artistic Bond movie. Like, there's straight up some scenes where it's like there's no sound and there's just music as an action scene is happening. And it's really good, and just some camera work in a Bond movie like you've never seen before. I wish they would honestly bring this guy back to do another one. But it's so great. And the whole idea of the whole Quantum storyline, I think, is awesome. And it sucks. I was really disappointed they didn't continue that with Skyfall, and then they kind of wrote it off for Spectre. But I hope the next Bond movie that supposedly Daniel Craig is coming back for, they really finish off the Spectre stuff in a really good way, because Quantum was such a promising idea, and then they dropped it for Spectre, and they just said that, oh, Quantum was like a side branch and MI6 shut it down. But if they nail the Spectre stuff, I think it'll also help this movie. But I think this movie is great. It's got these great action scenes, and they're actually molded after the elements. So there's like a chase scene through a quarry to represent Earth. There's a boat chase to represent water. There's a plane action scene to represent air. And then the last action scene takes place in a burning hotel to represent fire. And it's an artistic movie. It's different for a Bond movie. And I still think it's a lot of fun. Also, it's the shortest Bond movie, so it's one you can watch very easily. But that is my top 10 underrated movies. And I definitely had a lot more I wanted to add to this list, so I might do a more underrated movies later on, because I definitely have a habit of liking movies that people don't normally like. And sometimes movies just don't take a lot. Like Riddick, you give me an interesting character and I'll watch anything with that character and just hope it's going to be better. And, they're getting there slowly. But that's going to be it for my underrated movies. So why don't we move on to the end of the podcast and talk about the future. So, as I said, I'm not going to have a lot of time here to be reading scripts and discussing them with other people, just because all my guests are coworkers. So we usually record at work, and it's just impossible to do that during a sale. And I'm getting a couple recorded here in the coming days to bank for later episodes that I want to do and need. So script episodes are still going to be a thing. And once this sale is over, we're going to be back to script episodes on the regular basis. But for now, they're going to be a little few and farther between. Honestly, some of them I might be doing solo, just because it'll be easier for me to just sit down on a weekend and record by myself. And I don't want to do them solo, but there's some movies I might want to cover, or like, honestly, I've had some scripts that I've really been pushing towards guests that nobody seems to want to do. So maybe I'll just do them myself. And, I hope those episodes aren't boring for you, but there's one script in particular I really want to read because it sounds very interesting, and nobody seems to want to cover it. So maybe I'll just do that one by myself and see how it goes. In the meantime, I have a couple ideas. So when I first came up with the idea of, hey, I want to do a podcast, I had a couple different ideas. So one night when I was working at Target in the stockroom at my old job, I listened to a lot of podcasts, and I listened to a gaming podcast called Giant Bomb. And I was listening to an episode. It was around the time of when BioShock Infinite came out, and they were doing a spoiler cast for BioShock Infinite. So I'm listening, and they're talking about the end of the game, and I've never been a fan of the BioShock games, like playing them, but I always really like the story. And I'm listening to them, and they're talking about this scene where basically every BioShock game begins with a lighthouse, and the lighthouse is kind of your introduction into the world. And they explain that of being like, oh, there's all these parallel dimensions that you access through these lighthouses. And I was just picturing this scene in my head very cinematically, and I'm like, oh, like that would be cool for a BioShock movie. And that led to me thinking like, oh, like what would it be like? Why don't I just sit here and like in my head, how would I make like a movie of some of my favorite video games? And I pictured a Dead Space movie, and what I pictured was, I don't know if you ever played Dead Space, but it's kind of hard to explain in such a short amount of time. But basically, it's you're on a spaceship, and there's these aliens, demon creatures that turn dead bodies into monsters, and you have to dismember them to kill them. And it's a really crazy, awesome horror game and very grotesque, and it's fucking, you should look up Dead Space. But I was like, well, how would I make that movie? And I was like, I would obviously do it in a really weird way that's never been done before. And I think the whole movie would basically, the camera angle would be almost behind the back of the main character as it is in the game. And let me just say, nobody would ever make a movie like this. It's impossible to market this movie. It would be something somebody would have to do on their own, very experimental, so it can never happen because it also need to be an expensive movie. But basically, the whole movie would be following right behind the main character, who is Isaac, who is the character from the game. And the opening of the game is like, oh, you go into this ship and you're kind of answering their distress beacon, and the main character's wife was on this ship. So he's trying to find her, and she kind of appears to him throughout the game. And a spoiler for Dead Space if you don't want to know. But at the end of the game, you find out that she is dead, just like everybody else on the ship. She like killed herself, but he's been seeing her throughout the game. So basically he's hallucinating that he's crazy or whatever. And in the second game, you see her ghost like appear to you multiple times and almost like attack you. So I think it'd be cool to use that ghost idea. Like, so basically in the game, they all enter a room, your character gets separated, and that's when the monsters start attacking. And I think basically the whole movie is from behind his character, like over his shoulder. Maybe the camera moves around him, circles around him for some stuff, but the whole movie would have to be one continuous shot. And obviously you could fudge the editing a little bit to make this happen, but it would be insane to actually do it in one shot. That would be the achievement that would maybe actually get this movie made. But basically once the monsters start attacking, it's just fucking full-on attack until the end of the movie. You're just following the character as he's running, killing monsters, and story would be delivered through his radio as the other members of his team are contacting him and like, hey, you need to go here and do this. And we just follow him as he does that the whole time, getting attacked by monsters. Like, basically the whole movie is just set piece, set piece, set piece. Like, oh, this giant tentacle comes and grabs him, and he's being dragged, and the camera's being dragged with him, and a monster jumps on him and he's struggling, and the camera circles around him as he struggles off, and then back to his back as he escapes and starts running. And the story would also be delivered by borrowing elements from Dead Space 2, where his wife's ghost like appears and starts talking to him and like kind of grabbing onto him as she's got like staticky eyes and like static white noise coming out of her mouth. It's hard to explain, but you can look up a picture of it if you just search Dead Space 2 Nicole. But yeah, like she would grab him and story would be kind of delivered that way. And I was like, oh man, that would be an awesome movie. And I was like, I had a lot of fun thinking of that. Like, what if, and I was like just sharing this on Twitter at the time, and some of my buddies for like a video game website that I used to write for were kind of chiming in, and like we're all kind of spitballing. I was like, man, it'd be really cool to just do a podcast where all we did. And I was thinking video game movies because I like video game movies, and like there hasn't been a lot of good ones. So like, why don't we sit there and just pitch video game movies? And I think that would actually be a really cool idea. So for some future episodes, I think we're going to sit down with some people and we're just going to pitch movies. Like, we're actually talking about this at work the other day about a live action Darkwing Duck. Like, who would you cast? What would you do? And I think that'd be a really cool idea. Because like, honestly, that's how people come up with movies. I recently discovered and you can find this pretty easily if you search for Lucas, Spielberg, Kasdan, Raiders transcript. But it's basically Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and Larry Kasdan who sitting in a room coming up with the idea for Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it's the transcript of their conversation. And it's fascinating. And like, that's just how it happens. These three guys just sat in a room and came up with one of the greatest movies of all time. And like, I think that'd be fun to do on a podcast. So some of my episodes, I'm going to sit down with guests and we're just going to spitball movie ideas. Maybe we'll start with that Darkwing Duck one. I don't know, but that was one of my ideas for a podcast. I think it'd be really fun to incorporate it into this one. So that's going to be one type of episode we're going to do. The other podcast idea I had was doing movie commentary tracks for some of my favorite movies. And that's a thing we're going to do. We're going to start with, hopefully start with, covering the DC movies. So Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Suicide Squad, and Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is obviously not out on Blu-ray yet, so that one might come a little later. But I've always talked about how I want to talk about those DC movies, and I think a commentary track, which if you don't know what that is, it's basically where when you watch the movie, it's a like when on the Blu-ray or something, it's like the director or actors or writers, and they talk over the movie as you watch it and kind of talk about the process, or sometimes they just fuck around. If you want a perfect example of a commentary track that's fun, it's for a bad movie, but I would recommend watching the commentary track for the first Resident Evil movie. It's the first one I ever watched. It's the one that got me into commentary tracks because, like, as they talk about the movie, they're also just fucking around and joking around and having a good time. And I want it to be a little more like that. So if you want an example of what I'm looking to do, I would look at that commentary track as an example. Some people might also be interested in riff tracks, which is basically like Mystery Science Theater, but for like modern popular movies. And I think it's a lot of the same guys who were involved with Mystery Science Theater. But yeah, it's like we're not looking to make fun of these movies, but obviously we'll be making fun of some of these movies. But it's to honestly sit there and critique and talk about and just, have a good time watching a movie. And honestly, I think doing it with bad movies is a little more fun. Like, I'd like to, for a while, stick with franchises. Like, obviously, we said we're going to do the DC movies. I would like to do things like, for example, I would have loved to have done the fourth Transformers movie with somebody who had never seen it before the fifth one came out, to kind of time it for that. And so I want to do stuff like that. So that's kind of what we're looking at in the future here. I promise there are still going to be script episodes, but while I'm busy, this is something I think that'll be a lot of fun. It's something I can do on the weekends pretty easily. And I'll tell you, my goal is to get, for the first one, to get my wife to watch Star Wars with me, because Star Wars is my favorite movie of all time. But my wife has never seen Star Wars. And that's something that I think would make for a really great podcast, because you're going to listen to somebody experience it for the first time. And I honestly know it's a movie she's not going to like very much, just because, Star Wars is old. And we are talking about watching A New Hope first. And I'm trying to convince her to do it. And I think it'll be really great. And that's kind of the dynamic I want. I want people who either have a differing opinion of a movie from me or have never seen the movie. Another one I was planning on doing is watching the entire Fast and Furious franchise with a friend who has never seen them. And I think that would be a lot of fun to go through them and see how they evolve. But yeah, those are kind of two ideas for episodes I have in the future. So while I'm busy, that's what we're going to be doing. And I really hope you guys are interested by that. And again, I just want to say thanks as I wrap this up. It's been a blast. I love doing this podcast, and I hate that I'm getting busy and I'm kind of losing time to do stuff, but I really hope you guys like these alternative ideas, and I'm excited to see what it's going to be. Again, some of these commentaries, it might be me by myself, so those ones might be a little boring, but I hope they're not. I think I can prove by this episode that I can carry a conversation by myself, which is a problem a lot of people tell me I have in my personal life. But I'm a talker, so that's why I started a podcast. But thanks for listening to this basically half-year roundup. I'm really excited for the future. I'm excited to keep reading these scripts, to try some new things, and I really hope you guys are excited as well. If you want to follow us on social media, you can follow us at Shelved Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. You can email the show at shelvedfilmpodcast@gmail.com. We will read those emails on the mini episode. I love having conversations with people. I've definitely had some YouTube conversations in the comments, and maybe I'll transcribe those here on a future episode. But yeah, and if you want to read any of the scripts we have, you can check out our Tumblr at shelvedfilmpodcast@tumblr.com. And just be ready for the Spider-Man episode. Sorry, I was kind of losing my train of thought there. For July 7th, that'll definitely be the next script episode. I have already set up that recording. That'll definitely be the next one because July is creeping up here. So Spider-Man from 1983. I will throw that on the Tumblr early so people have plenty of time to read that. But in the meantime, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. Thank you for subscribing. And everybody, be sure to leave an iTunes review because I know how many people listen and how many reviews I have. Not everyone's leaving a review. And we are going to offer up some more wrestling shirts in the future here for iTunes reviews. So be ready to listen for that. I still have some digital codes for some movies to give away. So we're going to figure out how to give those out. But we're not going to talk about that today. So thank you for listening. And be sure to check back next week for hopefully one of our first alternative episodes.